Hello, I'm Amira Davis, professor of history and African American studies at Penn State and co-host of the feminist sports podcast, Burn It All Down. And I am pleased to be here today to host the latest coalition conversation on Juneteenth. Today, I am joined by three dope people who are going to help me have a conversation about Juneteenth, athletic activism, and where we go from here. So it's my pleasure to introduce Players Coalition Task Force member and NFL vet Devin McCourty, Players Coalition Ambassador and NFL vet Jason McCourty, as well as Players Coalition Ambassador and 4-year PLL vet, that's professional lacrosse for y'all, Jules Heningburg. And today we're going to have a conversation centered on Juneteenth. So as some of you, maybe perhaps at this point, most of you may know, Juneteenth is a holiday that's been celebrated for many years in this country in a variety of ways. It started as Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day, a day in which formerly enslaved folks in Galveston, Texas, celebrated hearing the end of slavery. Now, from the offset, this celebration was one of joy, and it was really one centered on celebrating Black Americans and how they wanted to come together as a community and look towards the future. When that Army Mountie rode into Galveston to say, hey, guess what, y'all are free, they're not celebrating the news of freedom. They're not celebrating being told, hey, you're free, but go back to your plantations and just ask for 50 cents this time. What they were celebrating was a right to determine for themselves their future. And those Jubilee celebrations extended throughout Texas, crept into the North in various areas. And what we really saw last year in the wake of George Floyd, in the middle of a pandemic, is a resurgence of a national Juneteenth celebration. And as of this recording, the Senate has just passed a bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday. So we're really at a moment of reconsideration, and that is really where I wanted to start the conversation today. I want to invite all of y'all to join with me to talk about the importance of Juneteenth, to think about it as a celebration of Black America and how we can tie that into the work that y'all have been doing as athletes and where we think conversations are going about Black history and about Black futures. So this is a fun panel because all of y'all are Jersey cats. And I'm curious, I'm from Beaumont, Texas, but I spent a lot of time in the Northeast, and what I know for sure is that a lot of people up there have just learned about Juneteenth in the last few years. So I would like to start by asking y'all, what does Juneteenth mean to you? And has that shifted in the last year? Have you learned more about it? What has Juneteenth meant to you, and what is it to you now?
I guess I'll start, Jason here. And I think for me, growing up, like, we never were taught anything about Juneteenth in school. Like, I can remember that we never discussed it, really had no idea what it was. And I think it was over the last few years, and especially last year, I think everything that happened with George Floyd and kind of the pandemic going on, everybody being at home, watching their televisions, and everybody seeing it for themselves. Like you said, it kind of created a resurgence and a newfound desire to want to learn more. And I think to me now, it talks to tradition, and it talks to about who you are. And I think for us, sometimes as people, we don't realize those triumphs that have happened in our past to recognize where we are today. And I think for me, growing up, you don't think about what your parents sometimes sacrificed, or even more, your grandparents or your great-grandparents, or what they had to live through to get to where you are today. And I look at myself and the career I've been able to have over a decade playing professional sports and being in arenas that I never thought that someone of my stature years ago would have ever had an opportunity to be in. So I think for me, when you talk about Juneteenth, it created an opportunity for myself and a lot of other people like me to be able to do things and be able to just have freedom, like you said, to have free will, to be able to make decisions and make choices on how your life was going to be.
Absolutely. Devin, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll piggyback since we had the same upbringing and went to the same school. So, we didn't have that history lesson. And I think that's been, something that I've tried to harp on with my kids and my family and, my surrounding circles is education of trying to know more and learn more. And I think now, as I sit here, Juneteenth is a celebration. I think, like you said, Dr. Rose Davis. We want to talk about the good things, and I've heard that come up so much these last, I would say, few months, is celebrating all of the positive things that Black people have done. We always talk about the tough times and defeating slavery, Jim Crow laws. We talk about whether it's the prison system, whether it's criminal justice. Like, it's always so many negative things that we sometimes leave out all of the positive things. Like you just said, the celebration of free will, of understanding that we all get to do as we please and understand what that took to get here. So let's celebrate the people that came before us. Let's have fun and talk about good times. So I know for me, it's trying to do that with my family now, of hopefully my kids having an upbringing and understanding what Juneteenth is a lot sooner than I did. And I think that's how we advance our culture and start to educate ourselves, so we're better off in the future.
Absolutely. Jules, what about you?
Yeah, appreciate that, fellas. And kind of just to go off that, similar, from my education growing up, like, I didn't really know what Juneteenth was from school. Like, it just really wasn't talked about too much, which, kind of looking back on the history a little bit, my town's pretty diverse. We have a large population of Black people. We're about, split 50-50 between white and Black, and other couple other, races and ethnicities as well. But, you'd think that in our school system, it would come up, which I think kind of just speaks to the greater education system. And I know we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but, that time of the year, it's kind of at the end of the school year, right before summertime. Again, you'd think like this is an opportunity to kind of celebrate the school year being over and kind of going off in the summer. It would be something that would be fun and exciting to kind of talk about. And perhaps it was addressed, subtly. I know in my education, 6th grade, which this is, again, crazy to kind of reflect on, 6th grade and 10th grade are really the only 2 grades we talked about, specifically Black history, throughout my entire history education. And luckily I had 2 great teachers in that capacity, because I know a lot of people weren't as fortunate to have those teachers that were pretty intentional. But again, it was never a primary topic of conversation. And I never recall it being recognized in our town as a holiday either, which our town does a great job of trying to put on certain events and trying to bring out, certain things to promote culture and promote the arts and promote a lot of things that, other towns perhaps don't do. And now that's obviously shifted, right? I think after last year, our town's taken a huge role in that, which is great. But again, it was crazy to kind of grow up and see that that wasn't the case. And I only started to really hear about Juneteenth in the past couple of years. And I just think that the word of that really is intention. And I know we'll kind of get to that later on, but the intent behind the celebration and the intent behind, what you're doing and how you're communicating about it. Even, me now kind of getting a little older, I have a girlfriend and she's also Black, and she goes, on, Juneteenth, I want to be around Black people and I want to celebrate. And that's something that perhaps in the past that wasn't a part of my life as much, because it just wasn't, like you said, in the Northeast. So I'm excited about that and excited to kind of just, again, celebrate, like the guys were saying.
Yeah, and Jules, I love when you said intention, because we're at a very interesting moment to celebrate this year's Juneteenth in 2021, because there's something that happens that's peculiar when these Black holidays become national in this way, that becomes corporations, right, are like, hey, Juneteenth Oreos or whatever. And we're familiar with that process, but I think that we're at an important juncture in order that we are defining for ourselves what this is. I mean, Martin Luther King's holiday has become a day of service. And I remember last year when people started talking about Juneteenth, they were like, you can do service. And I was like, Juneteenth is literally celebrating not working. Like, we're not going to be working, right? Run some spades, hit up some dominoes, like have a block party, but we're not going to, do a day of service. And I think that is one of the spaces we're at, which is as Juneteenth as a holiday grows, we're at a really critical juncture to redefine that nationally in terms of what it means in communities and what it means for Black folks across the country. And I think it's also really important because, as we noted, as y'all said, this really grew last year in many ways that were vital. But the other thing that has emerged in the last year is oppositional forces against the history that we were just talking about. We've seen massive push for legislation and bills that are banning what is being called critical race theory, but is really just opposition, it seems, to teaching about racism, to teaching about slavery, to teaching about anything other than Martin Luther King. And I think that because of that, it's really important to ask the question, what is your hopes for how we recognize Juneteenth? And you can take it as what you plan to do with your families, or what you hope that we see in terms of Juneteenth celebrations, how corporations might be getting involved with it, and thinking about the way that Black history in particular and how we talk about that is really under attack at the same time as Juneteenth and the history is reaching new heights. It's a very interesting, tense place to be.
Yeah, I know for me personally, I think of it as, for us as a country, we've thought about the 4th of July. You know, no one, I think like you just said, no one thinks about going out and working. You think about whose house you're going to, who's going to have the cookout, who's going to have, or who's cooking on the grill that day, and that's the house you want to go to. And I kind of see Juneteenth the same way. My hopes would be that it's not just Black people celebrating this, and you know, obviously I think we should be around Black people and you do that, but I think all across America, because I think so often in our country we separate Black history as if it's not American history, as if these things didn't happen right here in America. So I would hope someday that this isn't, you know, just a celebration for Black folks, but that everyone celebrates and understands what it means to have that free will. And you know, even if you didn't go through certain things, or your ancestors, you can still empathize and understand that journey and that plight. And I think, you know, hopefully, you know, when my kids are in high school and college, they're celebrating this in school and wearing, you know, the red and the green, and you know, they're all in there with their classmates, white, Black, Asian, everybody in there celebrating it. I think, you know, for me personally, I would see that as an amazing time in our country.
Yeah, and I would say on top of that is just kind of making sure the purpose of it doesn't get lost, and making sure as it comes up year in and year out, as we celebrate it, we're talking about what it is, and we're talking about what it meant for our country and what it meant for our people. And I think, like Dev said, when you talk about it's a level of independence that was gained. So let's celebrate it the same way. Let's go to the beach. Let's do those things. But while we're doing those same things, let's have those discussions that we sometimes don't talk about. And let's actually say what Juneteenth is, and let's talk about what it means to us, and let's talk about how we plan on moving forward. And like Dev mentioned, his kids, as they're coming up, and they're gonna look back and say, man, like I remember every Juneteenth. Every year we had a ton of family over. We were all celebrating it, and now they're going to grow up with a totally different understanding of what this holiday means and what it's going to mean for them going forward. And I think at that point we start to change the cycle, and we start to change from generation to generation of what this holiday is and what it means to our people and what it means to American history.
Yeah, I love that, fellas, and just to kind of piggyback, I feel like, again, the mindset of it, you know, at being such a significant piece of American history, you wouldn't really think twice about it being a huge deal or celebrated, just like 4th of July from when you're a young kid. You know, it's fireworks, it's going to the barbecues, it's going to the pool. It's just something that's inherently part of the culture. And I think the idea of patriotism in America, you know, inherently it doesn't seem to align with this holiday in the culture, and that's not an accident. And I think the idea, just kind of looking back in the history of Juneteenth, right, it wasn't an accident that it took 2 years for, you know, those slaves to figure out that they were freed. And I think that kind of aligns with the history and kind of looking at, you know, the way things unfold in our country over time. And I just think in recognizing it, you begin to kind of, again, establish, like the guys are saying, for that younger generation. And I think that's what it's all about, for them to have our nation's history and understand the context of why things have evolved, and then be able for it to be commonplace for them. And for everyone, for it not to be even a thought. It's you know, it's Juneteenth. Let's celebrate together, just as we do for 4th of July.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like.
Go for it.
Yeah, I like what Jules said, because I think sometimes we're at a point in our country where when we talk about Juneteenth or we talk about Black Wall Street, it's almost kind of like it's you're nervous to bring it up because you don't know how people are going to react. And I think to what you said is a very good point. Like, we need to talk about it, and it needs to become as common as something like the 4th of July is, where it's very normal that as it's coming up, you go to the store and you see Juneteenth sales, or you see T-shirts that are being sold, or whatever it is. I think we all can remember growing up, you'd walk into Old Navy as 4th of July was coming up, and everything had the American flag on it, from the flip-flops to the tank tops to the shorts, and you knew like it was a big deal, and it was normal. You would be surprised if you walked into a shopping mall and you didn't see that. And I think kind of to what you said, it kind of sometimes goes without saying, but it's been planned this way for it not to be a part of us, and we need to kind of make that just a signature, so it's not something that we have to discuss year in and year out about what we want it to be or what it should be or what it means to us. It's just that we know what it is and we expect it to be there every year.
Yeah, and I think what's so important for what y'all say, especially bringing that juxtaposition with the 4th of July, is such a great point to launch into the next kind of question. Because one of the things with the 4th of July is people, made the observation like, well, that really can't be your Independence Day if half your country wasn't really free at the 4th of July, which is why every year in those celebrations, you still have people reciting Frederick Douglass and asking what to the slave was the 4th of July. And I think that Juneteenth in many ways is absolutely American history and invites in a fuller sense of independence in actuality. But I think part of that is this point that you brought up, Jules, about patriotism as well. And when we're talking about the 4th of July and you're talking about rah-rah Americana and those American flags, we know that that flag doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. We know that the anthem doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And patriotism has been wielded like a battering ram against activists, against athletes, against academics, against anybody who dares to bring up challenging history. And I think that one of the things that is really important is that these ways that we define words carry power. And so to me, it's patriotic to watch athletes use their platform to agitate for change. That is the height of loving your country into beauty, into something better. And so I want to use that as a question to ask y'all. When we're talking about Juneteenth, we're talking about independence, we're talking about a celebration. We're talking about a celebration of resilience as well. And one of the things, if we look back through history, that we know is that athletes have played a very pivotal role in being very visible people who have been able to raise their voice at times when necessary to talk about the gaps between that idea of star-spangled patriotism and the lived reality. What role do you see yourselves or other athletes playing now in contributing to the fight for social justice ongoing and being leaders in that realm?
Jules, I was going to give you a chance to start. Me and Dev were dominating.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, fellas. I think just kind of in terms of the athletes, for a very long time over history, they've provided people, the unique capacity to take a step back and kind of look at the athletes and realize that athletes that they revere so much and realize that, they are human and that they experience things and live through things just as everyday people. But oftentimes with athletes, you see them being put on a pedestal in this kind of Superman role. And when you're able to kind of shift that narrative to say, look, like, there's things that I'm experiencing, there's things that I've gone through, there's things that my family and my community have gone through that are impacting me. People are able to connect with that more so than I think the everyday common person because it's out of touch for them. And I look at the NFL is a great example of this. They own a day of the week in the country in Sunday Night Football, and people are so engaged and so actively searching and looking for that allure of playing in the NFL, that when you take a player that is able to play every single week and really act as a superhuman on the field and say, look, this is what's going on, people are going to listen. And on the flip side of that, I think that you've seen a lot of pushback as well, and that's going to happen, and that friction is important for the conversation. But I think that it provides us a unique platform that really a lot of people don't have. And I think it's a huge responsibility. And I know that even this conversation right now, we recognize that there is a vested interest from our voices and that we must continue that conversation. And you've seen it again, time and time in history. And again, that backlash is going to continue to happen. But it's important for us to kind of continue these conversations so that we can move the needle. And again, that things such as Juneteenth can become something down the line that our kids are not even thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. And I think as athletes, like you said, we get placed on a pedestal and we get an opportunity to share our lives. And I think you think about it way back in the day to where it is now with social media, just from when I started in the league 12 years ago to now going in my 13th year, the access that the media has to us, the amount of different videos being placed on guys and guys sharing their stories. As athletes, we get an opportunity to share what we've gone through and what a lot of the people that we represent are still going through. And it allows us a platform and an opportunity to, like Deb always says to me, be a voice for the voiceless. And we're granted that opportunity because of our ability to catch a football or dunk a basketball, whatever the case may be. But on the inside, athletes are so much more than just what they do for a living. And I feel like as of late, we've really been able to see guys come out of their shells and be able to develop who they are off the court, off the field, or whatever the case may be. And I will also say, I think this age of athletes has been phenomenal. I mean, you think about back in the day, the Jim Browns, the Muhammad Ali's, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's, the Bill Russells, guys who were putting their careers on the line, the Jackie Robinsons, to stand for something and to break barriers. And I feel like you look at today's athletes, a guy like LeBron James, who has any and everything you can want as an athlete. I mean, the endorsements, the championships, the limelight, all of it. And he's standing up and he's standing on the front line and fighting for people that look like him. And I think when you see a guy like LeBron James, you see a guy like Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, guys of that stature who are standing up and are speaking out, it makes it easier for every other athlete, because these are the guys at the very top and the pinnacle of their respective sports, and they're speaking out. And it makes it easier for guys that are in their locker rooms who share an opinion, who may be afraid of, hey, what's the backlash going to be? How am I going to go about this? I still want to be able to provide for my family, but I also want to represent those that I've come from to continue to help their process to get out of wherever they're at. So I just think it's phenomenal, and I think as athletes, those that are willing to take the sacrifice, to pay the price, however you want to categorize it, but that are willing to speak out and put in the extra work and educate themselves, I think it's phenomenal, and it's a great opportunity to help those and to be a stepping stone for people after you to continue to develop and find success.
Yeah, I agree with both of these guys. I think you talk about athletes, and I think it's very interesting. A lot of times when athletes speak out on things that people don't want to hear, it becomes an issue. I think you look at through the history, whether it's been charity events or athletes signing things, athletes have always done things to better or help someone else's life. You look at the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and athletes do an awesome job, and organizations bringing a young kid in, letting them live out a dream, even though they might have a terminal illness or something like that. And I think for decades on decades, you've seen athletes use, whether it's been money, resources, time, anything that they've had to try to make other people's lives better. And I think that's what we see here. I think we saw the men and women before us who broke down barriers, whether it's been race, whether it's been equal pay for women's sports or women in the workforce. We've seen that happen time and time again. And I think it's awesome to see, in 2021, when we're supposed to be so progressive, and, there's people who look at black athletes, black people in general, and kind of give you that look of, you should be happy to be where you're at today because of our past. And I think it's awesome to see athletes say, there's a lot of room to go. There's a lot more that we can do to even this playing field in every single category you can think of. And I'm proud to have my name listed with some great men, being in the Players Coalition, obviously with Malcolm and Anquan starting it, but also with all of the guys that, obviously in the NFL, which, I give a ton of credit to Colin Kaepernick, a couple years ago now, starting this wave and really, at the height of his career, speaking out and using his voice, and now, being on a call with Jules, and he plays across, and, we're across so many different leagues now of athletes deciding to branch together to support each other. You look at Renee Montgomery, who's a part owner of a WNBA team and as a player. You know, you look at things like that. I think that comes from athletes being fearless, which we show every day in our sport, but also showing our fearlessness when it comes to attacking different issues and things we believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's really important to note that that pedestal that you speak of, that has been constructed because one of the only upward mobility, visibility, spaces for Black Americans were in positions of entertainment, whether it was athletes, singers, movie stars. And so the historical role that Black athletes have played has been because that is one of the areas that they knew they had a microphone. When Tommy Smith and Giancarlo and Dr. Harry Edwards were thinking about 1968 as a platform, it's because they said, hey, I can't go to the UN and be listened to. And I think that the other, part of it, particularly, is that Black athletes are well aware of how useful their symbol is to statecraft, to the country. So it was very useful for Jesse Owens to clean up in the Nazi Olympics in 1936. It was very useful for the United States to claim his wins as a win for their version of America. And yet when he comes back, there's no employment. He's still going around back to get food. There's no handshakes. There's no, American dream. He's racing horses in a humiliating fashion that he does not like. He talks about how he can't eat the medals that he won. That's the name of my book, Can't Eat a Medal, because that's what you hear over and over and over again. Althea Gibson, barrier breaker in tennis, winning Wimbledon and breaking that barrier. And she said, they call me the queen of the court, but I can't eat my crown, right? Like, that doesn't do anything for me. And I think that one of the things that we've seen throughout history is Black athletes saying, hey, this is the platform I'm on, and watch what I do with it. Watch how I call out your hypocrisy. Watch how I put that on blast, and then also bring people with me and mobilize, whether it's integrating schools or integrating leagues or doing work in the community. Wilma Rudolph, we know her for her 3 golds, but she's leading a direct action protest in 1963 to desegregate a local diner. And that history is absolutely, the foundation of what we've seen today, and names that we know and names that we don't know. And risks that people have taken. You mentioned Colin, of course, and women in the WNBA were shutting down pressers when there weren't many cameras there, when there weren't people really trying to listen, when they were being fined for saying, no, we're going to wear shirts that say Black Lives Matter. And, a few months before, everybody kind of stood at attention when Colin started to kneel. And I think that those moments are the ones that we have to bring with us when we're talking about Juneteenth and we're talking about this history. That history is so rich and so robust and has informed so much of the work that y'all are doing today that it's so important to continue to weave it all the way through. So when we think about that, and when we think about even the moment that we're sitting in now, it's been a year plus, 18 months or so, when the world stopped and then changed and rearranged, and we saw activism emerge differently in that moment. But Dev and Jason, y'all have been involved in this work since before it was accepted or expected, before there's that more safety net than there is now. You talked about what it means if LeBron does something, what it means for more precarious people in the locker room to be able to follow suit. Y'all were there early on. And so I want to ask you, given the last year and a half and this kind of elevated tolerance that we've come to perhaps have, how does your work, how is your work impacted by that? How is your kind of feelings about where everybody's kind of almost caught up to y'all? And how can we think about Juneteenth perhaps as launching the second chapter, a new iteration of that work that y'all have already been doing?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Dad.
Okay. I know for me, I had to check myself. I think over this last, like you said, 18 months, when things started happening, I kind of had the perspective of, finally you guys want to listen. Well, let me kind of tell you straight and let me get you. And I had to realize, like, you wanted ears, right? We all wanted more people to listen. We wanted more people to be involved. We wanted more people to see this as not just a Black problem or, that's those 5 guys in the locker room who like doing that. That's their issue and what they want to do. But not, like, that's what we wanted, and it was like, it's here now. And I know for me personally, being on the Patriots and the work we've done through the years, this past year, it wasn't, a couple guys here. It was our whole team. We have a social justice fund. Almost like I think everyone in the building gave. We had so many people involved in our social justice meetings on Monday, really at the end of the football day, but it was kind of mandatory. Like guys wanted to stick around. We have full team attendance. Those things, those conversations we had in the locker room, they weren't just, in one guy's locker with 5 guys. It was in our team setting where we're all talking about those things. So I know for me, seeing that, over the last 18 months of the work that led up to that, I think it was, I don't want to say the payoff, but it was kind of, as you continue to work and you do the right things, you just have to keep pressing forward. And, I think because we had already had so much time invested in the community and different things going on for our team, we were able to bring in resources and people to speak to us about so many different topics that it was just awesome for our team to get to know each other and to develop and understand American history and what goes on for some of our teammates. And I think, like you said, with the second wave of Juneteenth, I think it allows us to continue to press everything forward. It allows us to continue this wave or whatever you want to call it, this revival. I think it allows us to say, like, hey, we still have something here. Every year we have a date to look forward to make something bigger and better, to educate more and more people. I think in our society nowadays, you need something, you need that kind of thing that's going to ring the bell each day or each year to have something to go to. And I think Juneteenth is that will allow us to continue to educate ourselves and the people around us.
Yeah, I remember having some of those conversations with Dev. I remember talking to my wife, and we're people of faith, and I remember we're discussing and we're talking about grace, and we talk about the amount of mistakes that we make. Even for myself, from my being in my career, I remember when Colin Kaepernick first took a knee, and I remember I was playing for the Titans at the time, and the feeling like, man, have I been doing enough? Like, have I been out in the community and really trying to help those around me and serving the community? I remember at that time taking it more serious, getting more involved, asking more questions, more than just a protest on Sunday. And I think at that time, I remember talking to Dev and some of the guys that were on my former team, and we started to discuss and kind of challenge ourselves. It's just that, hey, like, we don't have the right to sit here and be mad at somebody because, now they're enlightened or now they're woke. It was just like, for us, it's an opportunity now to go ahead and help somebody. And at the same time, while you're helping somebody, it's not always your job to educate them, but it's great to be able to point them in a direction or tell them about this thing or that thing to help them get more and more involved. And I think that was the biggest thing, like Dev said, is taking a step back and realizing, like, man, this isn't about any individual person. This is about all of us as people as we continue to grow. And I think when we were able to realize that and grant the same grace that we would want from somebody else to those around us, I think it was able to blossom and it was able to grow. And we were able to have, especially in a team setting, some of those tough conversations that we usually overlook. Sometimes we come together in a locker room and we're so focused on whatever common goal it is to win a championship, to have a solid practice that day, to improve, whatever the case may be, that sometimes we miss out on those opportunities to really get to know the guy whose locker may be right next to me, to get to know his family and to know that, hey, this guy's raising kids and he's scared to death about some of the things that his young black son is going to go through as he gets older. And it granted us great opportunities, like Dev said, to discuss that. And I agree with him wholeheartedly about the second wave of Juneteenth. It's another opportunity for us to have uncomfortable conversations, to push the envelope so it doesn't die down. We don't want it to take the death of somebody like George Floyd to awaken everybody and for everybody to now care, to see so many different corporations and so many different huge storefronts to now start posting, or a Blackout Tuesday, or whatever the case may be. We don't want something tragic to happen for us to start to realize that, hey, we need to love each other and we need to respect each other. Let's just make that the norm and start to do that as people around us.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate what you said about grace, because it's so important, right? And I think that, threading that needle and be able to say, okay, if people have gotten there, even if you were there before, you don't have to give them a cookie, right? You don't even have to give them all of the ingredients and intake on that labor, but you can pass the recipe. You can give them the blueprint. And I think that has been so much work that y'all have been doing, the Players Coalition been doing, is laying that blueprint, is laying that foundation. I shout out the WNBA because I think that they've been absolutely doing a blueprint along the way as well. And one of the things that has been most heartening to see for me personally over the last year and a half is that a lot of this activism rests on history of Black athletes in predominantly Black sports or in Olympic sports. But what we've seen over the past year is that it's crept into sports spaces that have been seen as perhaps more difficult to have these conversations in. I've worked a lot with AJ Andrews, professional softball player, trying to have this conversation in softball. Kiki Stokes, of course, had to deal with a racist manager, and her entire team walked out in solidarity with her, and they formed This Is Us Softball last year. We have seen this conversation on Juneteenth last year. The MLS launched their initiative about Black players and diverse voices. The Black Women's Players Collective across the NWSL has joined and absolutely started doing that work. And so that brings me to you, Jules. How has it been to have these conversations and do this work in a sport like lacrosse? You're starting perhaps at a different beginning, entry point than Devin Jason, and then athletes perhaps in sports that have more Black people in them. And I know a kid I grew up with, Josh Hawkins. I remember watching his career and thinking, is Josh the only Black person who plays lacrosse, right? And so I would love to hear from you. How is it going? How's it been? Where do you think, what is the kind of state of Black lacrosse? And how might you use Juneteenth to continue to facilitate conversations over there?
Yeah, I would say, just kind of the word you mentioned with Grace, with these two guys here, kind of hearing from them and just knowing that that's something that they've kind of come to. It's great for me as far as a blueprint, and just kind of to hear that it reiterates to me that it's been a process that everyone's going through it, and it's been hard in a lot of ways, but to have Grace is super important because in lacrosse, like you said, we're pretty behind in a lot of different ways. I think when you look at the NFL, predominantly Black league, the NBA, predominantly Black league, the conversations that they're having and the difficulties that they're having largely revolve around kind of upper management, coaches, the front office, where for us a lot of the time, and lacrosse is a unique sport, obviously being a majority white sport, the college game was for a long time the pinnacle of the sport, where now we're looking to kind of get away from that and make the pro game the pinnacle. But in the college game, majority of the Division I coaches are white. I think that right now, I don't know if there's even any Black head coaches in Division I. I think, Chaz Woodson at Hampton University is one of them. And so a lot of these locker rooms are white coaches, majority white players. Then you have maybe one or two or three Black players on the team. Josh Hawkins being one of them at Loyola in 2012, won a national championship. But to kind of go through that process as being a Black player in the locker room, and now going into the pro game, where we're seeing, the game start to evolve and take off. We're at a point where we're just even trying to, fight to have people recognize that this is an issue in the sport, let alone get more players into the sport. So it's been a whirlwind. It's taken a lot of grace. I think that, shifting the culture in the sport is really important. And I think that, that's an issue across the country. We talk about patriotism and kind of how that perpetuates the systems across the country. I think the conversations that we're having in the locker room and that we've had over the past year have been critical. They've been hard, but again, they take a lot of grace to be able to deal with and interact with guys that are coming from different backgrounds and are coming from areas where they've never played with Black players before. They haven't interacted with Black players in their entire careers up until that point. It's been crazy, but it's been a real growth experience for myself. And I think now we're at a point where, we see a path forward for the game. I think the biggest thing for us, as we see the pro game, is going to accelerate. The Premier Lacrosse League, it's our third season now. We're on NBC. Salaries are starting to increase. I think, that's going to really boom and take off, and you're going to see players, and people across the country start to see, okay, how many black coaches are in that league? How many black players are in that league? What are their salaries? What does management look like? And for us as the collective group of, I think there's 20 of us now total right now playing, the biggest thing is how can we get more black players into that league? And what does that feeder system look like so that we can have more representation at the highest level, so that we can inspire more players across the country, so that we can continue to have those conversations, so that we can get more coaches into positions so that they can then recruit more black players. So with all that being said, it's been a crazy experience. It's definitely unique compared to the NFL and the NBA in a lot of ways. I think the other leagues have their own difficulties as well. But I think in recognizing Juneteenth, it's huge for us because it gives us another opportunity to just reiterate the work that we've been doing and celebrate where we are now as a sport. And I think that if you're not able to tell this history properly, then it's easy to continue to uphold the systems that are at play. And I think Juneteenth, again, it demonstrates exactly what's been said from day one in the Constitution when it was written, in that the rules have never been fairly applied to people of color. And I think that lacrosse really demonstrates that in our demographics. And it's a sport that I know that there's a lot of opportunity, and in my opinion, it's the best sport in the world. But I'm excited for the direction that we're going.
Yeah. And I think that it's been so dope to see, sports who are growing in many ways get to infuse these conversations into the foundations of these leagues as they grow. This has been very similar with the work that you see Ziara King and folks doing in the NWSL, which is like, how do we infuse this at the roots as we are also fighting for pay equity, as we're fighting for resources, as we're fighting for visibility, right? And so the beautiful thing about having conversations across sports is because you can see how it benefits all the different conversations, right? There's certain particulars for y'all in the NFL that aren't going to apply to lacrosse, but there also is a lot to be gained from those conversations. I think one of the examples that one of the work that folks have done through the NWSL and the MLS is to say, hey, we're talking structure. One of the things that we don't see is enough soccer fields in Black communities. So they've partnered with organizations to just get soccer fields built in communities so people can have access to the sport. And I think that those initiatives are things that we've seen then mirrored in like softball folks who are like, yeah, we need, what does it look like to think structurally about resources and amenities? And so these conversations can be really fruitful. So as we come to the end here, I have to ask y'all, so you're balancing a lot. You have careers, your family, you're still facing resistance from fans and ownership and all these larger structures, and the pandemic's doing whatever it's doing. How do you stay committed to this work? What is driving you? What continues to drive you?
Man, that's a great question. I think for me now, I guess being in the professional ranks for a while now, I remember early on in my career, we had a veteran, Gary Brackett, who played at Rutgers. I remember talking about just dealing with family and saying no to people. And I think at that point he was an 8-year vet, and he was just like, I'm telling you, the longer you play, the easier it'll get. And I feel like kind of for me, the more I've grown, the more I've come to know myself, the easier it gets to kind of just shut out the outside noise and what people are saying, the judgment, and focus on what's important to me and what's important to my family. I think the easiest thing about continuing to move forward is having a great foundation. And for me, I was raised by an amazing woman, my mom, who sacrificed a lot and did a lot for me and taught me just kind of what it meant to pay it forward and what it meant to give back. And I think I kind of followed through and was able to marry an amazing woman who now supports what we do as a family, knows that there's going to be times like tonight, fresh off the practice and stuff, that now I'm on a video and I'm talking about something that's not only important to myself, but important to the people that we represent. And I think also moving forward, I have 3 young children. And I think the things that we choose, especially as athletes, to get involved with, outside of our prospective sports or will be kind of our legacy as our kids grow up, because obviously you're hoping, you know, when you're involved in sports and you play professional sports, you hope your kids get involved in sports at a certain level. But who knows, they may not like sports, they may not be professionals, but man, the things that you do off the field, the foundational work, the stuff that you do in the community, those are the things that they're going to see, the things that they're going to actually be able to be involved with as they get older. And I think that motivates me to continue to do more. And I used to joke with Dev when I first joined the team with him over these past 3 years. He was huge in me getting more and more involved, and his heart for giving and just the sacrifice he makes are awesome. And we'd wake up on a Tuesday morning and have to head into Boston, and we're waking up 6:30 on our off day to beat the traffic in. And I'd be telling them kind of the day before, like, man, you're killing me. And then we'd get there and do whatever it was we were doing, and you'd see the impact. You'd see the smiles that you put on people's face. And I think that's always a motivating factor, because you know the work that you're doing is going to make a difference. And it may only reach one person, but that one person can turn into however many. And I think those three things, my upbringing, my family, my wife and kids, and just the amount of change it creates and the positive impact that it has, have been kind of the three motivating factors for me that continues to help me to push forward, to continue to sacrifice, to be able to get things done to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go second just because it's very similar to Jay. I think one of the biggest things is family. I think the work we do represents our upbringing, what our mom meant to us, the sacrifices our grandparents made, the sacrifices that all of the people that were part of our community made for us to be where we are today. And then, like Jay says, second, like the family you raise now. Like, I want my kids to look back and say, like, man, you know, Dad, when you played in the NFL, it seems like all of this was happening off the field. And I would hate for them to ask me, what did you do? And I'm like, oh, I played football. You know, I love to be a part of that and be able to talk to them about it. And then I would say, lastly, it didn't take long for me to realize what being involved meant. I still remember, you know, when Malcolm came to me about being in a Players Coalition, then about being a task force member. And then I remember, you know, we talked about going to the State House in Massachusetts, and I was like, I don't know, that's a big step up. And to go to the State House and to talk to legislators and for them to see how educated we were, you know, the things we were talking to them about. We didn't come here just for a photo op. We came to discuss real issues. And then when we testified and, you know, we did all these things to raising the age with the juvenile criminal justice system, then for education in Massachusetts, and to see those things change right away, it was like, we got to do more, because our impact, it's making a difference. And we had so many people who had been in this fight on the ground, boots on the ground for years, and they're like, man, you guys come in and you get involved for 3 months, and something we've been trying to get past for the last 3 years somehow makes its way through. And I think from that, it made me bother J-Mac and my different teammates of like, hey, I know you don't have the day off, but I need you to come with me and do this. I need you to do that, because I know the work we were doing, I know it was impactful, and I know it's our purpose. You know, I think there's certain guys that fall into whatever window you end up in whatever space at a certain time, because God has you there for a reason. I feel like that's been a part of my purpose here on earth. It's been my purpose, I think, being in New England, and I just want to try to encourage guys to do more of it, and just try to continue this work and see how far we can take this.
Yeah, Devin, I love the word purpose that you kind of just mentioned there. I think for me, that's been huge, kind of coming into this, you know, this space a little bit. And I think it starts, you know, with what you guys said about foundation. You know, just even going back to when I was younger, my dad, you know, he always used to just reiterate to me that, you know, I had to give back, whether that was, you know, to the younger generation of players, whether that was to the community, whoever it was. He always just kind of mentioned to me and would be in my ear that it was so important. And when you're young, you sort of don't really understand it. But as I got older, and I think in sports, they teach you a lot of, you know, valuable life lessons, I started to see that taking care of the younger guys on my team, for example, and what that meant. When I got to college, I really began to understand that. And I think that, you know, being able to be in a space now where I feel as though I have a purpose to help the younger generation and help, not only lacrosse players, but the community at a larger level. It inherently for me feels like a responsibility because of the people that did so much for me. And those people, sacrificed their time, put so much energy into me, my family. And for that to happen, you really start to recognize that no one's here individually because of what we do, right? It really takes a village. And for you to be a part of that, I believe it's, doing your part and uplifting others. It's really the thread that binds us all together. And I find myself now just being in a position where, that feels as though it's a purpose that I have to do. And I think the little victories that you see along the way, just for us right now in Black Lacrosse Alliance, we had our first official event with the Boost Camp, and we had a number of high-level players out there that we believe, again, we want to get more guys to the next level so that we can have a larger contingency of players to have the conversations, to inspire a new generation of players, to see them learn so much and to feel so connected to us as professionals, and really to hear the conversations and to hear them connect, right? That's what it's all about. And then that really gives you that feeling inside of this is meaningful, and there's a purpose behind this. And I know that, inspiring those guys is going to set, fire for them to then do it for the next generation and do it for the guys around them. And that for me is really what it's all about. And I credit, my dad for putting so much emphasis on that when I was younger, so that now it just feels as though you're in a position that you could get called to for a purpose, and you really just have to step up and really fulfill that.
Absolutely. So the fact that we're even sitting here having this conversation is representative in a shift in the climate. Whether we agree with the shift doing enough or not, we want to keep pushing it forward. But knowing that platforms like this is being embraced, I think, is significant. So to close us out, I have 3 lightning rounds of questions. Quick answers, don't take too long. I'll do something, I don't know what I'll do. I'll scream at you or something. So quick answers, we're just gonna go around. And I wanna start by asking, we've done a lot over 18 months. There's a lot of things that have suddenly shifted and moved the needle. What is the one thing, whether it's in your sport or in society, that you're really hopeful moving forward is the next kind of thing that you are either planning on doing work on, or you hope that everybody kind of also focuses on? One thing either in your sport that you're excited about, whether it's the work you're doing, initiative you got going on, or that you're hopeful will be the next kind of terrain of this fight. Lightning round, I'm gonna start with you, Jason.
Yeah, for me, I would love to see a continued change in education. I think that's kind of the future of everything. The more we can educate ourselves, the more we can impact change in our communities and the communities around us.
Great, Dev.
I would say education, as far as educating young kids about African American history, which is American history, getting that done in schools at a younger age, and trying to make that change.
Yeah, and I'll go with education, but more specifically in lacrosse, I think understanding the game at the highest level. I think there's so many talented players out there. The more that we can have the coaches really get those guys to know the game, we can continue to see those guys push to the highest level, and then create that domino effect to open the sport more to everyone across the country.
Awesome. So y'all are not exactly great at lightning rounds, even though you're very good athletes. So let's try to be really quick with this. If we're having a big virtual Players Coalition cookout, what are you bringing to the cookout? Jules.
Barbecue chicken.
Dev.
Hamburgers and hot dogs.
Jason.
Steaks.
Great, y'all are good. I'm bringing napkins. Awesome. We're all set. All right, and lastly, as we've said, Juneteenth is about capturing joy. So I would love to know, where are y'all finding joy these days? Is it Ted Lasso? Is it Peloton? These are my things. I'm just giving you my things.
I like that.
But Ted Lasso is legit. So I would love to know, whether it's on Juneteenth or beyond, how are you finding joy? Jason.
My kids, every day something new.
I should have said kids. Ted Lasso's better. Jules.
I live in San Diego, so being out in the sun is great. And then my nephew also.
Awesome. Dev, bring us home.
Pregnant wife due any minute, Juneteenth is up in the air because we're any minute now. So I guess the joy comes from the baby's almost out, and we'll have a happy wife soon.
Oh my goodness, yes. Now look, now we're all pulling for a Juneteenth baby. That would be amazing. Well, I have to thank all of y'all for joining me in this conversation. Once again, this has been a coalition conversation on Juneteenth from me, Dr. Amira Rose Davis, Devin and Jason McCourty, and Jules Heningburg. That's it for us for now. Have a happy Juneteenth.